Right. Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Martin Gosden, the South Wales and West of England Regional Network Events Coordinator. Oops, just interrupted by a phone, which I wasn't expecting. Um, so welcome to this webinar this evening. We're very, very pleased to welcome Carole Osterwell of the author of the APM's groundbreaking book, Neuroscience for Project Success, and why people behave as they do. And that's what the subject is for tonight's sort of webinar. Carole is a very, very experienced project troubleshooter and also an accredited executive coach. Um, there is an evaluation survey after this sort of webinar, please. So please do let us know what you think. Myself and my committee are sort of a group of volunteers. So everything we do is designed to meet your first personal professional development needs. So do let us know what you want, what you think, what you'd like from us in the future as your sort of regional committee. Bit about APM information. As you probably have been told already, that APM volunteering went through a major strategic review sort of last year, and now rather than the South Wales West of England branch, we're now the South Wales West of England regional network, and rather than specific interest groups, we now sort of interest networks as well. So it's all gone networking and change our titles and things like that. But for you as our members, it really makes no difference at all. We're still here to offer you the service we always have done, and we'll continue to and be very proud to do that. We have most of our events sort of face to face where we can now to encourage network, but occasionally when we have a really good speaker like Carole who can't really sort of travel sort of from where she is, we like to open out wider and go national rather than just sort of restricted to the regional area, which is great stuff. Just a reminder, please, of all the excellent resources there are on the APM website, particularly if you're looking at the sort of interest in chartered sort of project professional. There's lots of sort of regular webinars that the APM do centrally, which can take you through that process and explain what you need to do about that. There's also the APM community where you get together with your fellow project professionals and sort of understand and sort of get together and share good ideas and sort of learn from each other. So do get involved in that. We have a number of events going on. We launched our sort of project management challenge back in October. We successfully had sort of 25 project sort of plans delivered, which we assessed and reviewed and given feedback. And those teams, 25 teams, will now be proceeding with their projects in full and reporting back to us as judges at the end of March. So we're looking forward to that very much, with the finals night on the 29th of May. So events coming up. Next event is on the 26th of February. That's Essentials of a Good sort of project management organisation. And that's with the PMO interest networks. We're really pleased to be working with our colleagues, volunteer colleagues there. That's at Bauer in Bristol. 19th of March, we're looking at transforming the project management profession at the BBC, which will be really interesting because it's certainly a sort of something slightly different from the type of event we normally do. And that's over in Cardiff. We haven't been to Cardiff for a while, so we're really pleased to go back there. The BBC are hosting it in their central Cardiff offices, so that would be really good. So do look out for that. We're then going to look at project sponsorship on the 2nd of April, and we have the sponsor, the now cancelled, unfortunately, Stonehenge sort of a tunnel project. But Sophie is going to be talking about, Sophie Holland's going to be talking about her role as sponsor of that and how she had to manage the sponsorship in a very uncertain environment with the change of government and everything else that's been going on. Then 20th of May, we're going to look at the project management of the science of equality, diversity and inclusion, and that's at Atkins in Bristol again. Dr. Naira Chamberlain, who's spoken to us several times before over the years on big data and AI and that sort of stuff, is taking a very different slant on what scientific data can tell us about the diversity that we need to embrace. Then 17th of June, we're going to be looking at agile project management and risk, and that's being spoken about. The speaker is Claire Mills, who's one of our committee members. So she's a very, very experienced risk professional. Then the 19th of June, we have our branch corporate advisory group where our corporates get together with our sort of higher education institutions to sort of discuss matters of mutual interest, share good practice and go on with that. So if you're senior staff or you are senior staff yourself and they want to get involved, just contact sort of the branch and we can put you in contact with the people who run that. One of my other colleagues would be Claire Mills. Then early July, just sorting out the dates. we're going to be looking at PMO sort of net zero, and that'll be sort of looking at the sort of PMO interest network again, sort of taking that forward. Then have a bit of a summer break. 24th September, we're looking at AI in project management. Where are we now? We've got several other events in the pipeline as well, including our October sort of annual conference, South Wales Australian annual conference. That's in the early planning stages, so do look out for that later on this year. So it's now my very great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Carole Osterweil. Carole is the author, as I said, of the sort of APM's groundbreaking sort of book, Neuroscience for Project Success, and why people behave as they do. That's what the subject of tonight is. And she's going to really help us to understand more about ourselves and others and why we behave as we do, and what we can do about that as project teams and actually make that work for the total project and team's benefit. I think there's a chat function that you need to use. Carole's going to be asking several questions throughout the presentation. She wants some feedback from you, so please use the chat function, and we'll get that feedback, and she can deal with that and sort of respond to you as she feels able to. So without further ado, Carole, over to you, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that introduction, Martin. And I'm really conscious as I'm sitting here that neuroscience might sound like a really enormous word for people who are not used to thinking about neuroscience in the context of projects. And if you're one of those and you're wondering, why should I be interested in this? Well, I'm going to say to you, understand a bit of neuroscience. I sometimes talk to people about having just a pinch of neuroscience. It doesn't have to be academic study for many, many years. And you'll see the results showing in terms of better outcomes, higher productivity, and less stress. So I want to say to you, what's not to like with that? Yeah. And as we just have a look at what it is I'm trying to, the ground I want to be covering this evening. And really, the key thing is to be saying to you, look, I'm going to be giving you some real brain basics. I'm not trying to make you neuroscientists, and indeed, I'm not a neuroscientist myself, but I do believe there's some just basics which really can help transform and change the way we think about projects. And if you understand those basics, many people, particularly people who don't ordinarily get why people behave the way they do, and who think that people's behaviors can be quite random, suddenly stuff starts to fall into place. So I'm hoping that that's what you'll take away from this session. The other thing that I want to be doing, though, is giving you some new perspectives on stress. And stress, we know, is a really big thing in project management. Personal stress, yes, I'll be talking about that in the neuroscience context for it. But also, I have a view that we really don't pay enough attention to systemic stress. And I'll talk to you later on about what happens, how we accidentally, inadvertently set our projects up and then start creating stress across the system, which is why I describe it here as being systemic. So I want to give you a perspective on both of those things. And I want you really, as a result of what I'm saying, to be reflecting on your projects and yourself, your decisions, how you experience the projects you're on, and indeed your behavior. Now, Martin said I will be asking you questions. There's a few of them. I won't necessarily have time to listen or read all of your answers back, but the neuroscience tells us that just by engaging with that chat function, making notes for yourself, perhaps on a piece of paper, perhaps with the chat function, you will take more from this presentation and this webinar. So when I'm talking about interactive, it's interacting with me, but also interacting, I hope, with the webinar slightly differently to some that you attend. So my ambition is for you not just to be passive listeners sitting there going, no, what's Carole going to tell us then? There's something about you need to engage with it too. And in order just to get us started on that one, I have my first question for you, which is this one. When it comes to how your brain works, where are you starting? And I think, Maya, you were going to set up a poll around this one. So I'm curious about how many people are on the call. How many of you are in that place of number one? I know absolutely nothing here. How many of you are on the, well, I did a bit about it on school. Or number three, I've read lots about it. Some of you might even have studied at university. And it's quite possible that some people on this call are at number four. It informs everything you do, and you might even know more about it than I do, in which case I'm looking forward to learning from you too. So there we go.
got a healthy balance of people submitting at the moment, and actually they are two very close together. So, and they're switching as I speak, but I did a bit of it at school and I've read a lot about it and studied it at university, are very similar in their scoring. It informs everything I do is the lowest, a very small percentage, but it is quite evenly between the those two middle ones. I'll just give it a few more seconds and then I'll share the results just so that people can see a visual on what people are.
Lovely. I'm doing some rapid sums. How many people have we got on the call then? About 70, something like that. Is that right?
About 85.
Oh, very approximately 85. All right. Brilliant. Okay. Lovely. Yeah. So there we are. A bit of it on at school, or as interestingly, so since I've written the book, what I'm discovering, there's a lot more people actually that know more about it than they used to even 4 years ago. So I find that quite interesting, people reading more about it. And one of my ambitions in writing the book was to start introducing the ideas from neuroscience into the world of project management. So to see people saying, you know, I've read a lot about it, and it might be nothing that I've written, but it's now becoming far less marginal, I think, which to me is wonderful news. So great. Now, Maya, how do you take that poll down? Oh,
And now
like
it's back
that.
to you with the slides.
Brilliant. Okay. So what I want to do now is I'm going to move you on a slide. Oh, sorry. And if you hear me making noises, that's because things aren't moving quite the way I expect them to. Okay. So number one, I think is a kind of key point for you to all bear in mind is your brain's most important job is this. It's managing what's known as your body budget. Now, the body budget is an idea which has come from a neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she writes about it in several of her books, but I'm quoting from her in 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And what she says is, you know, well, what I'm saying to you is we're all very used to managing financial budgets, and she talks about financial budgets, but on projects, we talk about project budgets, don't we? And we know people will make investments and then we start spending the money. We're making withdrawals. And what Lisa Feldman Barrett is saying is, in exactly the same way, your body manages a budget, but the budget is all about biological resources. And this little picture that she's got here then talks about the kind of resources they are and the kind of activities we get involved in. So things like oxygen and glucose, things like carbon dioxide, salt, water, cortisols, we can keep on going, all of these hormones and neurotransmitters and fats and opioids. And I don't know what most of these things are. I gave up biology at the age of 13. But what I do know is we need to be able to manage it, and we need to be able to manage these resources and regulate these resources. And of course, the regulation of these resources goes on below our level of consciousness all of the time, whether we're awake or whether we're at work or at home, whatever we're doing. And essentially what we're doing here in our daily lives is we're making deposits in terms of the choices about the food that we're we're digesting, we're eating, stuff that we're drinking, making sure we're getting enough exercise or sleeping enough, which is a way of kind of recuperating, investing in our body budget. And one that I think is really underestimated, something that makes big investments in our body budget, is social contact. And I think we only began to really understand that in COVID, when suddenly social contact was taken away from us. So I just want to leave you to think about that for a moment. And then if those are things which constitute the deposits in our budget, things which constitute withdrawals, well, all of those things you're meant to be doing every day when you're at work. Thinking hard, decision making, talking to colleagues. If you look at the picture, things like going for a run, reading a book, whatever it is you're doing, it uses energy. Yeah, so in that sense, we are making withdrawals daily. All of our activities are making withdrawals from our personal body budget. But we need to be managing it. And I think we're only just beginning to understand that if we want to survive, if we want to thrive, and ultimately, of course, think about the evolutionary thing, it's about reproduction and passing our genes on, but we won't talk about that in the context of work or the context of projects. So just being aware of that, the need to be managing your body budget, your brain's most important job. Okay, so that's the first kind of idea I want to leave you with. The next one is this. Oops. So the next thing I'm going to introduce is an idea which comes from Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel is very well known in the world of
Oh,
understanding the human mind. He's best mates with people, I like to say, people like Dan Goleman, who some of you may have heard of. Dan Goleman is the person who introduced emotional intelligence to the world of work, or to the world at large, actually. And Dan Siegel has developed a model which I think is really, really helpful. It's a humongous oversimplification about how the human brain works, but nevertheless, it's really, really helpful. And as I'm talking to you through it, I'm going to be waving my hands at you and doing this. And I'm going to ask you, in fact, I'm going to tell you, wave your hands and copy me too. And that might sound absolutely nuts, but it will move the learning to from something that is quite conceptual into something which you really understand. So I can't see you on this screen, but I'm going to say to you, if you don't wave your hand, you're missing out. And if you're missing out, well, you won't remember so much. So it's up to you, really. But anyway, Dan Siegel says it's useful to think about your brain as having three parts. Now, I want to say to you, this is a metaphor. You can't cut your brain in half and find these three parts. They don't exist. But nevertheless, they're useful to think about. And it goes like this. So take your hand first of all and actually look at it. And then get your other hand out, just like I'm doing. Take the finger of this hand and trace around your palm. And in this model, the brain in the palm of your hand, your palm represents your brain stem. And your brain stem essentially controls all of your body processes, how fast your heart beats, how deep or shallowly you breathe. It's got stuff to do with your temperature control, your blood pressure, absolutely everything. And your brain stem, now just follow me, trace right from the root of your wrist here, right the way down to your elbow. And Maya, because I know you're there, and Martin, that's the only two names of people on this call I know. Are you actually following me? I want to know you are. That's a
Yes,
prompt for you to
definitely.
say something. You are. Okay.
yes,
So
definitely.
the
Yeah,
answer, your
definitely
brain,
doing that. Yeah.
lovely. So your brain stem connects right the way down through your body, through your central nervous system, actually. And it comes out at the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes. So it's all connected up, your body to your brain. Yeah. Now, the second part of your brain in this model, take your thumb now and wrap it over the front. In this model, your thumb represents your feeling brain. Essentially, this is your emotional command center. It's where aspects of memory reside, and it's where your behaviors and impulses and decisions originate. And then you can take your fingers and you can wrap them over the top. And now trace from your back knuckles, I hope you're copying me still, round to your front knuckles and down to your fingernails. And this represents your thinking brain. Your thinking brain being where logical analysis happens and rational decision making as well. And it's also the site of higher human functions like empathy, for example, or moral judgment. And can you see how all three parts link up? And they link up and link directly to your body. So the whole lot, just trace around the whole lot. It's a single integrated system which is using all of those biological resources that I spoke about. Yeah? And this integrated system, your brain and your nervous system, going right the way through your body, is essentially your command center. And it operates below your level of awareness all the time, constantly. And if it goes a little bit like this, if, for example, a car was to come towards you, or there would be if you were in Los Angeles and there was a fire approaching, as we know, there's lots of fires there at the minute. What we know is it would start to take energy away from your thinking brain. So essentially, the language I want to give you is this: when your fingers are down like this, your thinking brain is online. All right. If there is a threat, the car that comes rushing towards you, or the fire that I mentioned, depending on the size of it, it starts to divert energy away from your thinking brain. If it's a really big threat, it will take your thinking brain completely offline. So flick your fingers up to the vertical. When your thinking brain goes completely offline, you go onto autopilot. You don't stop to consider what you need to do. You do whatever you needed to do to get out of the way, to make an avoidance response. Yeah. So essentially, what I'm describing here is your fight-flight response, or if the threat's even larger and fighting or fleeing doesn't do it, you will freeze. So it's your fight, flight, freeze response I'm describing here. And we all know we've got that. So your thinking brain can be totally online or it can be totally offline, and anywhere in between, depending on the size of the threat that you're facing. The neuroscience research tells us that we don't distinguish between a physical threat like the car or the fire and social threat. And I think that for me, when I discovered that, that was really, really interesting, because it never occurred to me for a minute that I was concerned about social threat. Yeah, things which might have an impact on my status or where I stand in the pecking order, who might want to be mates with me, my sense of autonomy, things to do with uncertainty, how uncertain I am. All of those kind of things can have an impact on how I perceive the situation around me, and can take my thinking brain offline to some degree. And just think about that in the context of organizations, and thinking about all those people who maybe are behaving in ways which you think are a bit irrational. I would say to you, viewed through the lens of neuroscience, it could be that they are finding things threatening, and that's beginning to have this impact on them, taking their thinking brain a bit offline. And now I'm going to slow that down even more and talk to you about the avoidance response in a bit more detail, and then I want to talk about the opposite of that, the approach response. So if I detect a threat and it's a small one, actually the first thing that happens is I have a physical response. I may well not notice it. Often we don't notice it, but sometimes we do. When I first started doing webinars like this one, for example, I used to get a dreadful knot in my stomach. And if you'd have been here when we were doing the technical rehearsal last week, you may well have spotted that my voice had changed, that I was getting really anxious. There was a kind of butterflies in my stomach, sweaty palms, those kind of things. They're all indications of a threat response. So our physical response comes first. We make sense of our physical responses by naming them and labeling them as emotions. They're avoidance responses, and the biggest or the most frequently cited avoidance responses would be things like fear, being afraid something was going to be wrong, feeling a sense of shame, feeling really angry about something, perhaps feeling disgusted, or perhaps feeling sad. So they're the big 5 avoidance responses. And all of those have the ability to start taking our thinking brain offline. As our thinking brain begins to go offline, which, as I said, is an emotional response, it's a physical response, and we interpret it as emotions, we then, a number of milliseconds later, actually start to act on that. So our behaviors do not dictate what's happening. It's our physical responses which dictate what's happening. And the kind of behaviors which would accompany an avoidance response might be something like getting really defensive, perhaps going on the attack, talking louder and louder and louder at people you've really, really, really got to understand what I'm doing, waving your hands at them, and maybe even, fists if it was very badly, if you were unable to regulate yourself well. Going on the attack with wanting to withdraw from the situation. Have any of you ever had a stakeholder you found impossible to get hold of? Maybe that's about them withdrawing from it, or been in a meeting when you've actually got completely paralyzed and frozen and have lost the plot for a moment or two or longer. Those are all examples of avoidance behaviors. Yeah, and they can be related to any degree of severity. They last for different lengths of times depending on how strong that threat is. Now, what I perceive as a threat might be completely different from what you, or you, Martin, or you, Maya, perceive as a threat, because you will have had completely different experiences in life. And our perception is governed by our previous experiences as much as anything else. So I hope I'm giving you a sense of the avoidance response and what happens there. However, we're not always in a situation where we feel that we're in danger and under threat. Sometimes we feel completely safe. And when we feel completely safe, instead of evoking an avoidance response, actually what happens is there's more of an approach response. So our thinking brain will stay online, and the kind of physical sensations we have might be that nice, lovely, warm feeling in our stomach, or just, I don't know, feeling extended, relaxed, happy, all of those things. And the big emotions that go with that, the kind of sensations, might be things to do with feeling really joyful. We've just met a milestone. We've delivered this thing that we've been working on for 6 months or 6 years even. Feeling excited about what it is you're working on and who you're working with. Feeling really well supported by your colleagues, really trusted by them. Now, all of those things help us keep our thinking brain online, and accompanying that, the kind of behaviors which are possible are being able to learn really well, being able to collaborate really well, being inspired and inspiring, being really creative. In other words, all of the things that we're meant to be doing on projects 100% of the time are predicated on our thinking brains being online. And yet, if you think about people you've worked with in projects, or even yourself, I wonder what percentage of time you think thinking brains are always online. My experience is it's not nearly as often as we would have it. Yeah? So that's the first thing I want to say to you. Now, I'm conscious I'm covering a lot of ground here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of slides which kind of summarize some of these points, and then I'm going to ask you to just reflect on it for a moment. So this notion then, thinking brain of being online and being offline and anywhere in between, depending on the degree of threat, the amount of danger we detect, we suspect is out there. And I should say that the signals of danger we received through several different places. Number one, actually, is the information comes from our bodies. It's our physical responses which dictate how safe we're feeling before anything else. But it's not only that. We take in information not only from our internal worlds, but also through our five senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch, and what we taste. So sense information is coming in through our five senses too, and we're weighing up that combination of physical sensation and external information, and it's based on that we're making that judgment about how safe is it. As I said, it's happening below the hood, below the radar. And you might be surprised, I certainly was, to discover that actually more information flows from the body to the brain than the other way around. Yeah? I absolutely love this quote from Amanda Blake where she's speaking. And what she says is, 80 to 90% of information flows from the body to the brain. So the notion of thinking about the brain as the top-down command center is in fact about as outdated as believing that the world is flat. Just think about that for a minute. And then just consider for a moment, how much time do you actually spend tuned into what your body might be telling you? My experience is most of us don't do that nearly enough. And that's something I talk about a lot in the book. How do I learn to do that? Well, so we won't have time to we'll touch on it very briefly later on, but we haven't got time to cover that off in depth today. I'm going to move on one more slide if I can. Oops. So here's a summary, of what I've been showing you. You can see there on the left-hand side when your thinking brain is online and the kind of emotions it evokes and the behaviors that result. And there on the right-hand side, what happens when your thinking brain is offline, the kind of emotions that evokes and the kind of behaviors that result. So I just want to give you a moment now just to think, and maybe to make some notes for yourself or to put something into the chat. What does that start to explain when you see that picture in front of you? What does this model about being online and offline start to explain? Thinking about possibly your own behaviors and those of some of your colleagues at work. Mm. And I don't know, Martin or Maya, if you want to give any comment on that from yourselves. Well, either we're waiting for stuff to come through or maybe people are working on their own, pieces of paper, which is just fine too. Any thoughts from yourselves?
I think for me, Carol, it's all quite new. It's not some concepts I've come across before. I've done a little bit of study in the area, but and had some various training, but not to this level of extent. It's obviously my what I've been taught in the past is somewhat outdated by the looks of this. But yeah, so you can recognise your flight and fight responses, and something I was told a long time ago was an acronym called ERIC, which is emotional reactions in control rather than logic in control.
Ah,
So if your
okay.
emotions can come into control and you go down that route, and what you're doing is not
Mm,
necessarily logical, you're behaving entirely driven by your emotions. You're upset about
mm,
something, angry about something. So this is making quite a lot of sense
mm.
sense for me. Really, really helpful indeed.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that. So my question for those of you watching, listening in and watching, or what my hope is, I should say, as there's not much appearing in the chat. My hope is, as you look at that slide, and perhaps it's about picking up the slide pack after this webinar, really just begin to think about maybe some behaviors which you've observed either in yourself or in other people, and just try to track it back from the behaviors in terms of, is it possible there that actually it's an emotional response, and what kind of emotions and what might be triggering those emotions is part of the story. Yeah, so that's my aspiration for you. Yeah, but I'm not going to sit here because I'm conscious you also want to get away at night at 17, not 17, 19:30, 7:30. I won't sit waiting for people to be typing stuff in. I'm going to move on again if that's all right. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wave my hands like this. Imagine then you've got two people. Yeah? And this is really important. So as humans, we're social creatures, yeah, but we co-regulate each other. What that essentially means is this. If I'm here and somebody comes into, say, a meeting with me, and they are in a place which is like this, quite dysregulated, their thinking brain is not online, actually, I cannot help myself. I will begin to pick some of that up. Yeah, so how regulated, how online other people's thinking brains are around me can have an impact on how online my own thinking brain is. And I absolutely love this quote from, again, back to Lisa Feldman Barrett. It's like an ongoing undercover operation. She's talking about co-regulation. For the whole of your life, outside awareness, you are making deposits and withdrawals in other people's body budgets. So if you come into a meeting really stressed, you will be making withdrawals from other people's body budgets, because inevitably they will be picking up some of that vibe. And the more senior you are and the more influential you are, the bigger that impact. Yeah? So it kind of changes the shape of what becomes the job of leadership, I would say. And project management. For me, the key is we need to learn to regulate ourselves. And again, I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, in order to regulate other people. And it's only when our thinking brains are really online that we can help others to keep theirs online, and we can start to get the kind of behaviors which we know our projects depend on: the collaboration, the creativity, the learning, the flexibility and adaptability, the mindful decision making. The list goes on and on. So we are social creatures who co-regulate. Like it or not, the neuroscience has an impact on our behaviors and an impact on project delivery. Yeah? And again, we'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. And then I think this is my last one on the left-hand side from Lisa Feldman Barrett. What she says is, unfortunately, the 21st century life, and I put it to you, most of you are probably working on projects where people are really quite stressed quite a lot of the time. And most of 20th century life there will be dysregulating for us. It's engineered to screw us up. And if we want to be effective and we want to be resilient, then we have to work for ourselves on keeping our body budgets in credit. So doing things like getting the exercise, getting the sleep, eating and drinking well, and all those other things, and forging really helpful social relationships. We need the know-how to bring our thinking brains back online easily. Yeah. It's not realistic to expect your thinking brain to be online 100% of the time. That's not human. But we need to be able to bring it back online. Yeah. So just think about that for a moment. And I don't know again, or Maya or Martin or anyone else out there, whether feels really abstract or you're kind of curious about it.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
someone's giving me a thumbs up. Thank you. There is somebody there. Hooray.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
certainly,
brilliant.
Carol,
Thank you.
I certainly understand the issues about leadership and showing that positive thinking all the time, because your mood can rapidly change the whole team's thinking very, very
Yeah.
quickly. I've seen that myself. You can be very, very
Yeah.
careful. That's what makes leadership so difficult and hard work
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
many respects.
And there's a lot that's, I think, spoken about psychological safety as well. So just see that kind of context. That's a lot about exactly this as well. Yeah. Learning to do that, keep your thinking brain online, and helping other people do that is how you create a psychologically safe project and world. Okay, I'm going to clip on a bit because I'm conscious that the time is clipping by. So next slide then. Let me try this one. Okay, so I said I would not change gear, but talk also about stress, personal and systemic, I say. And the first thing to say about stress is that it follows, you can see that little curve there, the inverted U curve. I think it's really important we all understand. We don't want a situation where there is nothing going on at all, no stress, no arousal, that zero. It doesn't help us with performance. We need a certain amount in order to start motivating ourselves and to be delivering. Yeah, but the thing is, performance increases as stress levels rise, and then you hit the kind of, some people describe it as the Goldilocks point, the absolute, the sweet point where we've got just the right amount of stress for people to be performing well. But if we carry on layering the stress on top of that, performance falls off. And I think learning to judge our own stress levels and those of other people is really a vital point of being a project leader. And related to that is this wonderful, I say wonderful quote, this statement really that I'm making is my experience about from projects is in our quest for high performance, sometimes we completely misjudge that and it can turn into a really toxic environment. And the quote that's there comes from the Institute of Complex Project Management over in Australia, and they do a series of international they do international research and a series of roundtables which lead to research reports. And this one came from 2019. And they were really quite surprised. I did a podcast with Colin Smith, the chief executive, and I remember him saying, to me, Carole, we asked about building high performance project teams, but what we actually found there on these big, complex and major projects was a recurring theme about people having misjudged it. The culture was turning quite brutal, and often there was a whole series of mental health issues which went alongside with that. And many, many project leaders have a tendency to, when things are not going well, actually batten down the hatches, crack the wheel, and crank up the stress in the hope that that will get the results that they want. But actually, when you do that, it has completely the opposite impact. And so exactly the opposite thing is required. And so I just want you guys to think about the projects that you're working on. And just, I'm curious again for you to be thinking about that and just wondering whether people understand this inverted U curve of project performance, or whether actually they are overplaying, putting on too much stress in the hope of achieving the results just this once. Now, it could be I'm a little bit out of date. I suspect things have not improved as much as I might like them to. So I'm going to float that there and leave you to contemplate it for a minute. And I'm going to move on again with another slide. So this slide here talks about the project stress cycle. And this is something that I've observed happening. And I want you to kind of understand this is when there's too much stress. So if you imagine this person in the middle is kind of stakeholder, it could be you, it might be one of your sponsors, it could be your project leader, it could somebody you know who is feeling really stressed. And then let's just start following from this central gray circle here. So what we know is increasing stress results in an increasing amount of defensive behaviors, more and more of the fight and flight stuff going on. When there's more fight and flight stuff going on, it's quite infectious. And inevitably, if people are not behaving as well as you'd like them to, why would they trust you? So there's less trust there. And with less trust, we start to move up here to the green circles. We see less effective relationships and less effective communication, which result in less collaboration. People's thinking brains are not online so much, and there's less creativity. And inevitably, when that kind of thing is going on, what we start to see is a decrease in the chances of achieving the desired outcomes. And inevitably, the word on the street gets out. This project or this work stream is not going as well as we'd like it to. And when that happens, our stakeholders start to hear about it. And then that starts to dysregulate them. There's a sense, oh, it's not going as well as we want it to. And very often, when things are not going as well as they want it to, there is an increased need for getting some sense of grip, some sense of control on this thing. And in their attempt to get this greater grip and control on it, it can be adding more and more stress. There's more and more activities which are required to be doing it. So you can see how it starts to feed into increasing the stress on others working on the project and can feed this cycle. But the other thing that I see more and more happening is when we have this need for a sense of control, and it's generally because we're feeling anxious, when anxiety is usually quite generalized, what happens is people start looking for more information and more data. Just tell me how this is going. They increase the number of KPIs that they're wanting, more information they're wanting from us as the project team, which of course distracts us from doing all these things up here in the green, which we need to do in order to deliver the project more effectively. But then there's another impact as well, I think. I don't know about the people who are on this call. What I can say to you is there's plenty of project people that I know out there who find these relational activities, that is dealing with people and their unpredictable behavior, quite difficult anyway. And if that's one of you, or if that's you or somebody you know, when there's more information required, you're less inclined to do the stuff you find tricky. So you may well go back to your spreadsheets and your dashboards and all those other things which are easier to manage than the people. But if you're doing that rather than tending to this stuff, you're also decreasing the chances of achieving the desired outcomes. So I often say you set up this cycle, which can be quite a vicious one at some points, which then starts to feed itself, and you see a cycle of declining performance. And again, I'm curious about where have you seen this cycle or parts of it playing out? And I'm just going to be quiet for a moment and give you a chance to reflect on that. And again, if you want to put anything in the chat, or if you just want to reassure me, maybe this is an invitation, by doing some kind of response to what I'm saying, some kind of reaction, I don't know, it's a smiling face, a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that would help me know that there's some people there.
We certainly do have people in the audience. One comment is that they're loving the content and the way that you're delivering it, Carole.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you. That's very reassuring. So thank you for that. Okay, and I hope so. You're giving me lots of reactions, which are great, but I do want to encourage you to reflect on this question. Where have you seen this cycle or part of it play out? Yeah, because my experience is it happens on lots of projects, and I'm seeing all those reactions coming in. I'm guessing, yeah, I can see, you can see it. And if this cycle is playing out, then does getting more data help your case? I suspect not. The trick is to kind of recognize you've now got this systemic pattern, and then to think, what do we need to do about it? And again, I explore this quite a lot in the book, but I can give you a tip now. One of the things that's really helpful is to interrupt the cycle. And just by putting this slide in front of people, and as I said, you will get comments, not comments, copies of that afterwards if you want them. If you think you're seeing it, one of the things you can do is just to put it out there and just say to people, I wonder if you've seen this. Am I imagining it? Or is this the kind of thing that might be going on? And if it is, what might we need to do to start to interrupt it? And can you see, I hope you can see how that can really change the conversation. And one of the things about it is it's not about pointing the finger anywhere. It's about highlighting the systemic nature of the challenges. And that is vitally important to remember, that it is a systemic challenge. It's not just somebody is doing something wrong there. Okay, so I'm laying out the challenge in front of you. Oops, let me see. Can I get this? I'm guessing some of you are sitting there going, okay, what's the solution there? And as I say, it's really tempting to look out there externally to look for more data. And I have a running interest with the conversation about AI, because I reckon AI is an invitation largely to find more data. And I'm not saying there's no value in it. What I am saying is, don't be led to believe that it will answer everything.
Right.
And if you're not careful, you may use it to feed a stress cycle without actually addressing the root cause. Now, I've written about that quite separately. I'm not going to go into it here, but it's a conversation I'm really interested in continuing with other people. And actually, I know that in some organizations, they're now looking at for human-centric data. So what data can we get about the way people are feeling about what's going on in the projects and what their own views are, the more personal, people-focused data, which is helpful. But I won't go into that today, but what I'm going to do is say, don't fall into that trap of just looking out there. Just as, if not, and actually I would say more important, is to start by looking in here at yourselves and at ourselves as a project team. And when I say start looking in here, I'm talking really about taking self-awareness to a different level. And I say self-awareness to a different level because usually when I mention, or often when I mention self-awareness, people go, oh, that means I've got to get some 360 feedback. And I want to go, yeah, that's kind of part of it, but it's not all of it. And then I want to point you to these two little pictures, really, and remind you of this and me saying to you, most of the 80 to 90% of the data comes here from your body. And we never pay attention to that at all. So these questions I'm asking, self-awareness for yourself then, think about how am I feeling at the moment? How am I behaving? And I'm really interested at the end of the day, when you look back at the whole day, and I'm conscious, here we are nearly 7:30 and some of you have probably been online for most of today. I'm wondering how many of you are feeling like that figure kind of stuck at the keyboard? Yeah. Whether you noticed during the day that you, no, don't feel, I hope you're not feeling like that. Well, maybe you are now. Yeah. But that's kind of awareness of actually, what is your energy like just now? Because your energy level just now at any point in the day will tell you a lot about how online your thinking brain is, which kind of brings me to that second image, which is a bowl of tulips. And I know too often in the team, especially when we're in that place of people having been cranking the pressure too much. Yeah. We can have people, including ourselves, who are feeling really kind of wilted like those tulips. And what we really want is team members who are up here. Yeah. And they're on the right-hand side, feeling quite alert about what they're doing. And now I've got a challenge for you. I won't be able to see you. I don't know if anyone can see anyone else, but I've got an invitation for you. And that's this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to invite you just to stand up for a minute and to do this. Give yourselves a really good shake. So Maya, Martin, are you doing it? Is anyone else out there? 75,
We're
80% of you
shaking.
having
Yeah,
a good
shaking,
shake?
shaking. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And just then stop for a second. If you're standing, stay standing. And just notice what's different for you. And I'm guessing actually you notice a shift in your energy levels and a shift in how alert you're feeling. And so I'm talking about being aware of that in yourself, as self-awareness is a different level as well. Because it's when we're feeling, I'm going to say, my bet is that you're feeling more alert and a bit more awake than you were 5 minutes ago, even though my content is really engaging. And that allows you to kind of have a contrast and to go, okay, so before that, maybe I was not as alert as I thought I was. And maybe my hope is your thinking brain is a bit more online than it was a few minutes ago. Huh? So I just want you again to contemplate that and to know that in the book I do a lot of talking about how can you learn to get your thinking brain more online by becoming more aware of and listening to what your body's telling you. It's one of many ideas that we cover in the book. But let me just take you on. So I'm hoping that by having got you all to stand up, and you, of course, having obliged or have had a good shake in your seats, that what you're now able to do is to be able to think a little bit about this curve.
Right.
Yeah, so we're back to that performance and stress arousal curve, yeah, the inverted U, and recognizing, as we go towards the right hand side, we can be quite dopey and quite sleepy, and then we get to a point when we start to feel in the zone, when we're feeling just right, when we're kind of calm but we're not tired, and we're alert but we're not anxious.
Right.
Yeah? That's the sweet spot, what we should be aiming for. If there's too much stress, too much pressure on us, though, too many expectations on us, then we will get to a point when we start to feel uncomfortable. And the further we go over towards the right, our thinking brain starts to come offline. And we get to a point sometimes when we are caught by very, very powerful feelings, a sense of being overwhelmed at times, of stuff being completely out of control, which will really activate our fight, flight, freeze thing. So, learning to judge this question, where am I on this curve? Inviting other people to tell you where they are on this curve, because I don't think it's realistic for us to read the minds of other people and start to have conversations. Where are we? Where am I? Where are you? What do I need to do? What do you need to do to get your thinking brain more online and to be able to talk about it so that you're actively managing stress levels and the stress cycle is a really, really powerful thing to learn to do. And I know it can be game changing for people. So I want to encourage you to experiment with doing that. And I'm going to kind of race now, I think, towards the end and hope I don't overrun by more than a couple of minutes. And I hope most of you will stay here. But anyway, let me just carry on for a minute. So essentially what I'm suggesting here is there are 4 steps to turbocharge project success. If we start here, that question, how online is my thinking brain? This is all about self-awareness. And then asking yourself this second question, okay, it's not as online as I want it to be. How do I get it more online? And how do I keep it there more often? Yeah? That's a really vital question and a vital skill set to develop. And that is all about self-management, is how do I get it online and keep it there more often? And what we know is the more online our thinking brains are, the more we're able to judge what's really going on around us accurately, how other people are too. So it makes us more socially aware. This question then, how online is there these other people's thinking brains? And then you can start to be really managing relationships well. How do I get their thinking brains more online and keep them there more often? And as I said, the aspiration is not that you're there 100% of the time, but that you're flexible enough to recognize when it's going offline and start to bring it online. And you can do that with other people. And that's a bit like building a muscle, really. Yeah, you can learn to do that. And what this does is it gives us the more online our thinking brains are, the more clearly we see and understand the world around us. The more clearly we can see how and why other people are behaving the way they do. We have clarity of decision making, and quality of our thinking and analysis is so much better. If any of you are related to or have dealings with PMI, this kind of better thinking and better decision making and better emotional intelligence, which is those 4 other steps of self-awareness, self-management, relationship management, and social awareness, equates to the PMI power skills. And I argue that these are the 4 steps to turbocharge project success. Yeah, these are the vital things to learn to do. The most important, I would say, the most important skills to have. So to summarize then, my aspiration is to help you and encourage you to be wanting to lead projects by managing the stress cycle. If you can learn to get your thinking brain online and experiment with it just a bit, then it's a bit like going to the gym. Repetitions, there's loads of different ways and different exercises you can do to help build that muscle to keep bringing it back online. But whatever you do, don't assume that everyone's thinking brains are fully online all of the time, because they're not. Learn to get yours online and then start creating the conditions to get and keep others online. The conditions which go with psychological safety and better project delivery. And with it, also remember the systemic piece, so that you can really start to spot and then to manage the project stress cycle. And I've certainly worked with people, and if you're interested, there's a little video from somebody who I did some work with who now manages projects by managing the stress cycle. Yeah, so it kind of, as he says, it cuts out so much of the complexity and so much of the background noise, and it really allows them to focus on adding value, which is, of course, what we're all about. So that's what I wanted to give you today by way of input. I'm going to move on with one more slide. Sorry, where's it gone? Sorry, one more slide, she goes. My where's it gone is me having a conversation with GoToMeeting. Okay, so there we go. I'm here. I'll be staying. I know we're at 7:30, but I'll be staying a bit longer if people have got questions you want to ask me. But the other thing that I want to say to you is that APM have very generously offered a 20% discount on the book from today until the end of the month. All you have to do is to go to apm.org.uk books and use that code Neuroscience20 to get your discount. Okay? And then on this slide also you see my contact details. But over to you. So to you, Martin, to you others, to Maya, to facilitate any questions.
We have had a few come in, and thank you very much for speaking non-stop for the last hour. So I'll try and give you a few seconds to catch your breath, Carole. But one of
Thank
them
you.
has been about, obviously, there are people with different learning styles, but also there are people with ADHD and a whole range of learning complexities and differences. And do you find that either of the offline and online triggers are slightly different, or if there's any considerations that either help or
Okay.
weaken?
That's a really interesting question. What I would say to you is the model of online and offline, I believe, is an absolutely universal model.
Oh,
Yeah. Different things might take somebody's thinking brain online or offline. If you're a reflector, being asked to be really active, an activist, for example, or if you're an activist being asked to sit and reflect, like I've been asking you today, might make you quite uncomfortable and cause a bit of anxiety, therefore might take your thinking brain offline a bit. But nevertheless, the neuroscience behind it and the need to learn to regulate is just as applicable. And the same goes for all different degrees of sort of different kinds of neurodiversity. So I've had some really lovely feedback from people who've got ADHD or people who've got on the autistic spectrum, all kinds of different things might take them offline a little bit. And sorry, can I just check? Can you still see my picture? Because it's come off the screen here for me.
It's
oh,
showing
yes, we
your
can. Yep.
contact
Oh, yeah?
details.
Oh, I am
Yes,
still
it's
here.
showing.
Good.
Yeah,
So I think I must have just knocked a wire. So, but this is a universal model. Yeah?
Oh,
And the secret is, if you're working with someone who is neurodiverse, is to be asking them, what is it that takes your thinking brain offline? Or
oh,
if you are neurodiverse, to be able to say to other people, I find this thing has this impact on me. And so it would really help me if you were able to do this, which would help me do this. Does that make sense?
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so it's a universal model, which is really, I find really helpful. And people tell me they find it really empowering. I think the other thing I would say is when it comes to things to learn to regulate yourself with, different people find different things useful. Some people will like to go for a walk when they're feeling like this, and it will help them get their thinking brains more online. Other people might like to sit and do some mindfulness exercises, which some people might find really stressful. And I remember working with one person who had ADHD, and he said to me when we had this conversation, I said, "Well, what do you need to get your thinking brain back online?" He said, "I'm just going to go down, I'll spend 2 minutes doing 40 press-ups. I'll be back."
Right. 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 Right.
So I
Right.
hope that's answered that question. I don't know if there are any other ones that people want to raise.
Right. 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 Right.
Yes, and there are also some comments. So there's one that recognises the situation in regard with more data equals more control, and seen on that various various projects can become a never-ending cycle of data provision, impacts on delivery.
Yeah. Okay. So people are recognizing that. And I would say that more data does not necessarily mean more control. I think I have a really big question, which is it the right data? And often, as I said, I think people's anxiety can be really generalized. And so it can be really helpful to say to somebody, out of all of this stuff that seems to be going wrong, what in particular, get them to be specific, what in particular is the one thing that will make all the difference to know about? Okay? That can be one way of handling it. Another thing to be doing sometimes can be, or another thing to remember that's important is it's not to get caught gathering too much data on too many different subjects. Sometimes the hardest thing is to have the conversation about what the data is telling us and then to adopt different actions because of it. So I've seen many a data collection exercise go wrong because nobody knows how to stop gathering data and actually start doing stuff.
Right. Right. Right.
So
That's a
that
good
sort of
point for
sums up
me as
that.
well, Carol, with the data gathering. The question I always ask is, what are you going to do with the information?
Yeah,
If you're not going to do
absolutely.
anything with it, it's not going to add any value. Don't bother trying to get it because it costs money, time, and resources and effort to get data. If you're not going to
Yeah,
do anything
that's
with it,
right.
it's not going to help your decision making. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, so I think there's really something about demonstrating that people demonstrating that they know how to use the data is so important. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Again, I don't know if there's any other questions out there.
Um, do any of the neuroscience theories help with managing other people's stress cycles?
Sorry, I caught half of that, Maya. Having asked you to turn the
Do,
volume down earlier, I now can't hear you. Let's
do
try
any of
that
the
way.
theories help with managing other people's stress cycles?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the neuroscience absolutely helps manage other people's stress cycles. But I think one of the things you have to understand is your stress. If you are highly stressed, it will leak out anyway. You can't hide it. So it's not, you have to learn to regulate, you have to learn to manage your own too. You can't just assume it's out there. Yeah. You need also to be able to manage yourself to an extent or to find ways to, yeah, to find ways to create some space for yourself.
And sort of to summarize a few of them, and possibly to have as your last question, are there, apart from obviously being more in tune with your own emotions and behaviors, um, is there anything that you recognize that can turn your brain offline or back online?
Well, what I would say to you is it's intensely personal.
Mm.
something that I might find threatening, often, not always, but often. So for each of us, something that we will find threatening is often because it reminds us of something that was threatening in the past. And of course, we've all had completely different life experiences. So you can't predict exactly what it's going to be for each person. There are, however, there is some work which was done by David Rock, which talks about 5 main sources of social threat. And he uses the acronym of SCARF. So the S for status, C for certainty, A for autonomy, R for relatedness, that sense of being part of the in crowd or not, and F for fairness. And if there's a reduction in any one of those things, can take people's thinking's brains offline, but different ones of them will have a different impact on different people. Yeah. And therefore, but the corollary of that is if you're paying attention to how you work with people and you're thinking about status and autonomy and relatedness and so on, then you can design changes. Sorry, you can design all kinds of things, your initiatives to be being less dysregulating, but also you're also learning then how not only designing it, but in the way that you actually interact with people, you can manage those things too. But behind all of that, it's really important to be able to regulate yourself. And I know it's really complicated as I've given you these answers. So what I want to say is buy the book, or if you don't want to buy the book, have a look at some of the stuff on my website, Visible Dynamics, because I've got quite a lot of extracts, different versions of it, which might be helpful for people.
Right.
That's really kind, and thank you for that as a sort of finishing question and comments.
Okay, so I now realize I can actually stop sharing my screen if I can find out how to do it.
I'll come
There we
back
are.
in now and say, Carole, thank you very, very much for a really interesting sort of event tonight. It certainly opened my eyes to quite a few areas. I've done a fair bit of this sort of stuff in the past, but I think that obviously thinking's moved on. Your thinking is obviously way out there as well. I sort of about sort of in advance from where mine has been. I personally had a lot of reflection and echoes about what I have done and experienced. And the thinking cap on and the thinking cap off, or the sort of thinking brain on and off, makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I know that I can get stressed, and I know that you go into non-rational mode, and you do go, the emotions take control. What I don't think I'd appreciated is the concept of the brain or the body being controlling 80 or 90% of the brain. That's a very new concept for me, and how you relate to that. I think you've given us a lot of very good insights on how we work as individuals, how we work with others as a team as well, and and just being aware of the stress curve and where you are on that and where your team members are. And I think those questions, I totally get it. As a leader, I'm really sort of a firm believer in as a leader, as an enabler, as a facilitator, and that all matches in very, very nicely with what you've been saying. As leaders, we're there, and team leaders, to help people perform the best they possibly can do. And the key part of that, which you've been making very, very clear, is managing that stress levels and making sure that they can keep their sort of their thinking hats on, their thinking brains engaged to get the best performance you can out of them and the team and yourself, and everyone enjoying themselves and not feeling sort of under threat. If you enjoy yourself and having fun, you can perform far, far better than you ever do if you're under the cosh all the time. And I can also see where the senior stakeholders get involved. They want to be seen to be doing something, so they demand more and more data. And it's not always the correct thing to do, because you're taking up energy and resources and producing what? Any added value? Probably not. Going to be very careful with that. You need a certain amount, but not too much.
Yeah.
So,
I think
Carole, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I think for many people it's completely counterintuitive, but when the stress is on, it's about pressing the pause button. It's like exactly the opposite of what the pressure tells you to do.
Yeah.
Let's just stop
Taking
for a
that
bit.
step back, reflect as a team, as a group, saying, hang on, where are we going here? This isn't feeling right. Let's take a step back. Let's just take a pause. Where are we? What do we actually need to do? And move forward and give that control and facilitate people, to facilitate the team sort of taking control themselves and working out their own solutions rather than having it done to them, which is never a good idea if you
Indeed.
avoid that at all
Brilliant.
costs.
Lovely. Well,
Okay,
it's
Carole,
a pleasure.
thank you very, very much, and thank you for dealing with your own stress last week with the technology and everything else. I think emotion reactions were definitely in control a bit last week, as we all were. I think sort of fighting the technology. That's what I know puts my stress levels up. They're sort of to very high levels almost instantly if the damn computer doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing when it's supposed to be doing it. So thank you very much once again. Um, for everyone on the webinar, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do give us the feedback, sort of let us know what you think, so we can sort of respond to what your future needs are as well. We will have the slides on the APM website. I'll do a little write-up as well, as I quite often do with these sort of things, to help you think about it, reflect, capture the notes you've taken down, and really get as much out of this session as you possibly can do going forward. And taking some ideas back to work, what you can do with your own teams, and being open and honest as well, as much as you possibly can to be self-aware. It's all tied up with emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, as you said, Daniel Goldman, sort of, and your leader also on this is work very closely together as well. So that's very, very clear. So that's fantastic. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you again before too long. Thank you.